Oh, what's this you found? A devlog? Wow, I haven't seen one of these in... Oh man, 4 months? I should upload more. Anyway, hi guys, I'm Eli from Greenbox Games, and this is the wonderful tale of how I made the game Little Soul for the third Blackthorn Prod Game Jam. So the theme for this jam was less is more, and I was lucky enough to come up with an idea pretty much right away. A bullet hell shooting game, where the lower your health gets, the more damage you'll do. Less health equals more damage. Shooting will use your health as ammunition, so you have to manage the balance of damage output versus safety. You can do massive amounts of damage, but you'll be one hit from death the whole time. Or, you can slowly chip down an enemy's HP, but it'll take longer, giving the enemy more chances to hit you. However, I wasn't really sure what form this idea should take, so I started sketching some concept art and came up with this little soul guy that blasts enemies with a massive laser. But I use Game Maker for my games, and I'm mostly used to doing pixel art. But I figured I could do a high-res game because the art wouldn't be too hard for this one. And so I started setting up a test room. The main reason I wanted to do high-res for this project is so that I could use a perspective camera, because I think perspective looks way better with high-res than with pixel art. But of course, there was a catch. Apparently, when you use a perspective camera, the mouse becomes very lost and doesn't know where it is on the screen. It's got something to do with the perspective camera being 3D and needing to find the Z-intersect with your layers, and I tried to figure it out, I tried to make it work, and I just gave up. And there was also this weird bug where the asset layers wouldn't keep their rotation when I ran my game with the HTML package. You know what? It's fine. I like the pixel art better anyways. So I restarted. God, I love this part. No progress, yeah, and changed everything to be my beautiful low pixel art resolution and started on some coding. I added some basic floaty movement and collisions and started work on the main attack, the laser. And I would love to tell you that I was a flawless programmer and I got it on the first try, zero effort, so easy, but it just did not go. Look at this. What is that? What is that? Yeah, this took me way too long, but I finally got it working, and you know what? Actually looks pretty sick. Next was the energy system, so that your beam would actually do the thing the whole game was built around, which is get more powerful the lower your energy got. Then I added in some movement particles and made this weird indicator for the energy that I just ended up removing later. With the basics done, I started messing around with some concept art for the environment. And after one I didn't really like, I came up with this very striking Mountain Dew Baja Blast-esque background with a black silhouette level that I thought looked pretty sweet. And as you can see in the concept art, there are all these cool energy and electric effects emphasizing the power of the player and his laser. So I decided to add a sort of lightning effect into the game to match that. And at first it looked really bad, and I wasn't sure how to fix it until I lowered the alpha to make the effect subtler. Then it ended up looking pretty nice. The next step was the enemies. Now, I know you all love shooting at blank walls, but I just felt like the game needed a bit more, you know? So I started working on the enemy that I drew in the concept art. You play as the good little soul, which would logically make the enemies evil souls. This actually ended up being the boss enemy for the game, and I didn't really have a name for him or any of the other enemies I had thought of, so I ended up just naming them after things that might haunt or consume an evil soul, and so this enemy was named Malice. First, I just set up an object for my enemy that would draw an eye on top of itself to point at you. Then, because circles are boring, I made a spike sprite and set up an array to handle drawing them all around the enemy object. Next, I added in a basic AI that just tries to stay a certain distance away from you. Finally, I set up a bullet object with another array to handle drawing the bullet trails, and the first enemy was done. The next day, I added in the collision code that let the player and enemies hit each other, and the parallax background based off of the concept art. The collision with enemies actually ended up being a lot more work than I had originally anticipated. The way I ended up doing it was that the laser sends out a set of collision lines that cover the width of the laser and return the instance IDs of all the enemies hit. I use multiple collision lines because you can't rotate the GameMaker collision rectangle, and I wanted the collision to cover the entire beam of the laser. Then it sends all the enemy instances into a list. Then that list goes through and adds each instance once into another list so that the laser is not dealing damage to an enemy more than once. Then it takes the final list and runs through all the enemies, dealing the appropriate damage. It's probably not the best way to handle something like this, but it's the one I came up with. Next, I started setting up the game room. For convenience of level building, I like to have everything in a single room, and lately I've been trying out a locking camera that can only view a segment of the screen until the player moves into the next, while also unloading everything outside of that segment. But it wasn't really working how I wanted it to, so I took a break from that to work out the enemy death animation. I decided just to go with the simple particle explosion to save time, but I still think it ended up looking decent. I also set up a checkpoint object. I was trying to stick to a kind of mystical theme, so I made them these mysterious magic diagrams inspired by classic alchemy circles. Then I went back to trying to get the screen segments to work, but it just kept unloading the wrong stuff, and considering the time constraint, I decided that it wasn't worth fixing. Also, I realized a free camera would just work a lot better for this kind of game anyway. So I scrapped the old level and scaled down the room to make the scope a bit more realistic for the time I had left. Then I made a new level map with the basic structure of combat rooms connected by pathways, trying to keep it as rough as possible so that I could have maximum freedom to change things for the benefit of the gameplay while in the editor. Next, I added in some destructible walls. I was really not looking forward to doing this because I was worried about cluttering my laser collision code by adding in another object to check for, but then I realized, oh wait, I can just make an enemy that doesn't move and only has 1 HP, so I didn't have to change the laser code at all. And because the breakable walls were enemies, I made them these pulsating living organisms that block up passageways. In hindsight, I should have made the fact that they would both deal damage to you and that you could break them clear, because some people ended up getting confused while playing. Then I set up the basic tutorial, where the game shows you how to regenerate energy and shoot your laser. But I decided I would come back and add text prompts and clear indicators later. Next, I added in 2 more enemies, Hate and Shame. Hate is just a smaller version of Malice, and Shame will always try to position behind the spot you're aiming. Shame also shoots a burst of fast bullets instead of the spread seen with the other enemies. Finally, I added in the enemy Revenge. Instead of being found in the combat rooms scattered around the map, Revenge hides in the pathways that connect the rooms to add a little bit of tension in between the main fights. But to make it fair, it only takes 1 shot to kill Revenge, and it only disperses projectiles when it dies. With all the enemies done, I started building the level. What I like to do is block everything out so that I can get a feel for all the distances and do some playtesting before I commit and spend time decorating and polishing the level. So, as you can see here, I'm laying out all the walls, then stretching them to fill the empty space. I'm also adding the checkpoints into the appropriate spots. The next challenge was making an easy-to-use system for building the combat rooms. The idea was that you would enter a room, hit a trigger, and start the combat, which would close all the exits and spawn the enemies. So I knew I would need a room index variable to distinguish all the rooms from each other, but I didn't want to have to go through every door, every trigger, and every enemy setting a combat room index variable. So my solution was to have a central combat manager object that would have a hitbox collision with all the other combat room objects and handle the state transformations. This system made it super easy to add the combat rooms into the game. The final objective of the game is to unlock a end gate or door and go through it to win. I knew that I wanted to have a key system and that the 3 bosses would be guarding them, so I made a sprite and a quick object and got the keys working with a global key unlock variable. Next, I designed the end gate. I decided just to make a larger version of the checkpoints, but with 3 rings that would light up with each key you found and a central gate that would only activate once all 3 keys had been found. Then I made some art and set up a basic main menu and made my thumbnail for the itch.io page. I opened up BFXR and got to work on some sound effects. I also imported the music that my brother, Monkey Beats, made. The link to his channel is down in the description. I got him to split his song into 2 different tracks and set up an adaptive soundtrack, where the music would get more intense once you entered a combat room. With just a few hours left on the clock, I made some tiles and renovated the game room, adding in more interesting shapes for the rooms and passageways, and then tiling the whole thing, giving the walls some texture and adding in some decorations. Then I finally went back and finished the tutorial, adding in the text that tells you how to play the game and what your objective is. After finishing that, the game was pretty much done, but I still had some time to spare, so I tried my best to optimize the game and get rid of some of the really bad lag on the browser version, but I ran out of time and had to leave it. Luckily, the Windows version runs just fine, so if you want a smoother play experience, I'd recommend downloading that instead. Finally, I uploaded the game to itch.io, added some screenshots and a description, and submitted it with 8 minutes to spare. And after a week of playing and rating people's games, the results were finally in. I ended up getting 7th overall, which is easily the best I've done in a jam of this size. I'm super happy with how I did, and I just want to thank everyone who took the time to play my game. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.